Ethan stood frozen in the narrow hallway, his breath shallow, his fingers still gripping the edge of the wall, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The sunlight pouring in from the living room windows painted a calm, almost peaceful picture, but what he was hearing behind that door was anything but peaceful. It was cruel, sharp, and deeply personal. The kind of words that didn't just hurt in the moment, but stayed buried inside someone for years. Liana didn't move. She didn't defend herself. She didn't even look surprised. And that was the part that shook Ethan the most. There was a quiet acceptance in her posture, as if she had already made peace with this kind of treatment. As if this wasn't new. As if this had been happening again and again, in the same bright daylight, in the same house Ethan believed was safe. His mind began racing, desperately trying to reject what he was witnessing. This couldn't be real. His mother, Margaret, had always appeared strong but fair, strict but caring. He had grown up believing that everything she did was out of love. And Liana, she had never once complained. Not a single time had she hinted at any problem. She smiled. She cooked. She listened. She supported him through every difficult day. How could something this painful exist beneath such silence? But the truth was unfolding right in front of him, impossible to ignore. Ethan's thoughts dragged him back through the past year. Moments that once felt ordinary now seemed heavy with meaning. The way Liana hesitated before answering simple questions. The way her voice softened unnaturally whenever his mother was around. The way she would sometimes pause mid-conversation, as if carefully choosing every word to avoid triggering something. He remembered nights when she sat quietly by the window, staring into nothing, and when he asked if she was okay, she would simply nod with that same gentle smile. He had believed her, and now that belief felt like betrayal. A deep, uncomfortable guilt began to settle in his chest. Not loud, not sudden, but heavy, suffocating. It wasn't just what his mother was saying. It was the realization that Liana had been carrying this pain alone, while he lived in complete ignorance. While he laughed, rested, and trusted that everything was fine. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar to him. The walls, the furniture, even the sunlight, it all felt like a carefully painted illusion. And behind that illusion was something much darker, something he had failed to see. Ethan leaned slightly forward, his heart pounding louder now. Each word from the living room hitting him harder than the last. There was no anger in him yet. Only disbelief, confusion, and a growing sense of shame. Because deep down, he knew something. This wasn't just about his mother. This was also about him. Because silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes, it means someone is suffering quietly, waiting to be noticed. Liana shifted slightly, her hands tightly clasped together, her fingers pale from the pressure. The strength she showed wasn't loud or visible, but it was there, hidden beneath layers of endurance. She had chosen silence, not because she was weak, but because she didn't want to create conflict. Because she didn't want Ethan to feel torn between his wife and his mother. Because she believed that maybe, someday, things would get better. But they hadn't. And now Ethan was standing there, realizing that the person he loved the most had been slowly breaking right in front of him. His throat tightened as another wave of memories surfaced. The day Liana insisted on handling everything at home so he could focus on work. The way she reassured him during his stressful months. The quiet sacrifices he had never questioned. Every small detail now carried a painful clarity. She hadn't just been supporting him. She had been protecting him from a truth he should have faced long ago. Ethan's grip on the wall loosened slightly, his body trembling as a new emotion began to rise within him. Not confusion this time, but something deeper, something heavier. Responsibility. For the first time, he wasn't just hearing what was happening. He was understanding it. And understanding brought pain. A sharp, undeniable pain that spread through his chest, making it hard to breathe. Because the reality was simple, yet devastating. Liana had trusted him. She had believed that he would stand by her, protect her, understand her. And instead, he had unknowingly left her alone in a place where she should have felt the safest. The weight of that realization was unbearable. Outside, the world continued as usual. Cars passed by. Birds chirped. The sun shone brightly over the quiet neighborhood. But inside that house, something had shifted forever. Ethan slowly straightened himself, his mind no longer trying to escape the truth. He wasn't the same man who had walked into the house minutes ago. Something inside him had cracked open, forcing him to see everything clearly, painfully, honestly, completely. And just as he gathered the courage to step forward, to finally face what was happening, to no longer remain a silent observer in his own home, he heard something that made his entire body go still. Something that didn't just reveal the truth, but exposed how deep the damage really was. His eyes widened, his breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, time itself seemed to stop. Because what he heard next wasn't just humiliation. It was something far worse. What Ethan heard next didn't just hurt. It shattered something inside him completely. It wasn't just harsh words anymore. It was the tone, the certainty, the repeated nature of it all. The kind of cruelty that doesn't happen once, but becomes a pattern. And in that moment, Ethan realized the most painful truth of all. This had been going on for months, maybe even longer, right under his nose. Liana's silence suddenly felt louder than any argument. It carried the weight of every insult she had swallowed, every tear she had hidden, every moment she chose peace over her own dignity. And the worst part? She had done it for him. Ethan felt his chest tighten, guilt crashing into him like a wave he couldn't escape. All those nights he came home tired, expecting comfort, while she was the one silently breaking. All those times he thought everything was fine, while she was carefully hiding the truth to protect him from conflict. He had failed her, not intentionally, not knowingly, but painfully, completely. For a moment, anger rose within him, raw, sharp, uncontrollable. But it wasn't just directed at his mother. It was directed at himself. Because deep down, he knew something important. Respect isn't just about what you say. It's about what you allow. And he had allowed this. The realization changed him in an instant. The same man who had stood silently in the hallway just minutes ago was no longer there. In his place stood someone who finally understood the cost of ignorance, the danger of silence, and the responsibility of love. Ethan stepped forward. This time, there was no hesitation. The air in the room shifted the moment he entered. The sunlight still filled the space, but now it felt different, like it was exposing everything that had been hidden for too long. Liana's eyes widened slightly, not in fear, but in surprise. She hadn't expected him to be home. She hadn't expected him to hear. And in that single glance, Ethan saw everything. The exhaustion, the quiet pain, the strength it took just to stand there. It broke him. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply, silently, in a way that changes a person forever. Margaret turned as well, her expression shifting as she realized what had happened. But for the first time in his life, Ethan didn't look at her as just his mother. He looked at her as someone who had crossed a line. And for the first time, he didn't stay silent. The moment wasn't about anger. It was about truth. A truth that had been ignored for too long. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't create a scene. But the calm firmness in his presence carried more power than any argument ever could. Because when someone finally decides to stand for what's right, they don't need to shout. Their actions speak louder. That day marked a turning point. Not just in their home, but in Ethan himself. The illusion of a perfect family shattered, replaced by something real, something honest. And honesty, even when painful, creates space for change. The days that followed weren't easy. Healing never is. There was tension, distance, silence of a different kind. Not the painful silence of suffering, but the necessary silence of reflection. Boundaries were set. Conversations happened. Not perfect ones, but honest ones. And slowly, things began to shift. Liana didn't transform overnight. Pain that builds over time doesn't disappear instantly. But something changed within her. The quiet weight she carried began to lift, piece by piece. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in her own home. For the first time, she felt seen. Ethan made a choice every single day, not just once. Because real change isn't proven in a moment. It's proven in consistency, in small actions, in the way you show up when it matters. He listened more. He noticed more. He protected what he once overlooked. And through that, something stronger than before began to grow. Not just love, but trust. A deeper, more honest kind of love. Margaret, too, faced something she hadn't expected, accountability. It wasn't easy for her. Years of habits, beliefs, and control don't fade quickly. But being confronted with truth forces reflection. And even if change came slowly, it began. Because sometimes, people don't realize the damage they cause until someone finally stands up. Before we reach the ending, we want to hear from you. Have you ever realized someone's pain too late, or stayed silent when you should have spoken up? Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. In the end, this wasn't just a story about conflict. It was a story about awakening, about understanding that love isn't passive. It requires courage. It requires awareness. And sometimes, it requires you to stand against the very people you never thought you would question. Ethan didn't become perfect, but he became aware. And awareness changes everything. Liana didn't forget the past, but she found strength in the present. And sometimes, that's enough to begin again. Backhand index pointing right. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness 2.0. Because sometimes, the people who suffer in silence aren't weak. They're just waiting for someone to finally see them.